Hello and welcome to another episode of CSC Chat. I'm your host, Jacob T. And joining me today here is David Severson. David is a sophomore here at CSC and is majoring in human biology. He's an EMT down at Pine Ridge, South Dakota. We are here today to ask him a few questions about his EMT experience. David, thank you for joining us today.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. Along the way, there's so many questions I need to ask you for today. The number one we're going to ask you is going to pertain to your EMT experiences. Can you explain what you do as an EMT and how long have you been working as an EMT?
So I've been working as an EMT for about 6 months now in Pine Ridge. I got my EMT license last June over the summer. As an EMT, you respond to calls, obviously, and you do basic life support, which is the very minimal stuff. So it's pretty fun.
It sounds pretty fun.
Yeah.
I know there's so many things you can learn about it, so much involved with the EMT. Then as we go on, what's the difference between an EMT and a paramedic? And what are you able to do on the job? And along the way, what are you restricted from doing?
So the difference between EMT and a paramedic, EMT is basic life support, while paramedic is advanced life support. So paramedics can give narcotics and 42 different drugs, whereas an EMT, I'm only limited to about 10 drugs that I can give, and a lot of them are like oxygen, glucose, so they're very minimal stuff. And what I'm restricted to, I can't do any invasive maneuvers in saving a patient's life.
Oh, I always wondered about that.
Yeah.
I never knew so much about it, but that's pretty interesting. How do you, there's so much how I said, we've been talking about the restrictions and from the differences along the way. How do you juggle being an EMT and a student at the same exact time?
So where I'm stationed, we have 2 ambulances, and it allows me time to do a lot of my schoolwork because we rotate calls. So I'll do my schoolwork in between calls, which normally would be an hour range between calls. And then usually I work nights as well and days. And if I work nights, then I sleep, and usually I don't have schoolwork to do. And then days is usually the weekends only, so I usually have my weekdays free.
Well, that's good. At least it all works out together. That's all that matters. So as we go on, what made you become an EMT?
So I wanted to further my patient care because I want to become a doctor in the future. So I figured that being an EMT, I could get hands-on experience rather than shadowing a doctor, so I can get the first-hand experience of saving a person's life, I guess you could say.
There's so much experience and so much involved with, especially with the people you're dealing with along the way. As an EMT, has experience helped you with learning in the classroom?
I would say a little bit, yeah. Some of the stuff doesn't correlate exactly because when you do your EMT class, some of the stuff isn't exactly what you would practice. And same with my college here. Some of the stuff I do is right now I'm taking a stats class, so being an EMT doesn't really help me in a stats class. No. But overall, it's built me not to procrastinate, I guess you could say. So
as long as it all comes together, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Eventually, everything will always take its place along the way. Now as we go on, there's so much involved, such as the ins and the outs. There's none as we go on. Are there any dangers involved being an EMT?
Yes, there are some. I mean, you can get bloodborne diseases, especially because you're dealing with a lot of blood, and if your glove rips or needles, as well as going on to a scene, and if it's a shooting scene, it could not be safe because the shooter could still be around, as well as patients who are combative and want to fight you. I've had a few of those instances. So.
Oh gosh, that sounds pretty much a life-changing experience.
Yeah.
Speaking of experience, what is the craziest experience you've had on the job as being an EMT?
So one of the craziest things I've had actually happened a few weeks ago. We went to a shooting, and it was a patient, and he had multiple gunshot wounds, and blood was everywhere, shells were everywhere. It's one of the most eye-opening scenes I've ever been at. So.
Wow, that sounds pretty life-changing. I'm not gonna lie to you. So, as we go on, we talked about the dangers. We talked about your experiences being an EMT. Throughout all the times, what advice would you give a person in the future wanting to go into medical field, and how is being EMT going to help you in the progress further in both your education and in your future?
So advice I would give someone is be open to ideas. You don't have to be an EMT. You can work in a hospital and be a nurse. But I would say EMT is one of the best just because you do get to work in a hospital environment. When you drop the patient off, you can help the nurses start IVs. You can hook them up to the heart monitor, stuff like that. And also it gives you a lot of mix of experiences. You're never experiencing the same thing every day. And I kind of forgot the second part.
That's understandable along the way because, like you said, there's so much and you wanted to go to. You talked about the EMT experiences and many of them throughout the whole entire time. And it's been an honor and a pleasure for you joining us. But that is all the questions I have for you here today, David. And it's been an honor and
Thank
a
you.
pleasure.
It's been a pleasure.
So as we conclude another episode of CSC Chat, where we talk about Chadron State College student, teachers, and locals. A special thanks to David for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on the CSC Chat.